So pretty interesting announcements over the past few days. Managed to miss this one just after being gone for a little while, but we got a chance to talk about the Seattle Surge a decent amount, right? Now, there was a lot of back and forth on this roster in particular about whether or not this team was in fact going to be formed. It had been rumored for a while. Then there was a rumor that came out that said, "Oh, the team has kind of fallen through. Plans are starting to go elsewhere." It was kind of easy to read tweets, if you will, that kind of indicated that players, maybe this kind of team, possibly may have fallen through, much like the Seattle Surge team was kind of indicated that it would the year before. Octane was supposed to team with a number of different guys. That ended up not happening. It seemed as if that possibly could in fact be happening yet again. However, the rumored roster does in fact come into play. Seattle announces that Octane will now be playing alongside new signings of Looney, Gunless, and Prestini. Now, when we look at this four on paper, it instantly showcases to me that we have a lot of history here, right? The first kind of few people that stick off the page are obviously the new guys. Two of those players in particular are Looney and Gunless, right? Back in World War II, played under Rise Nation. They won multiple championships together, have played obviously under the same team for a while, and have a lot of history, which is very important to bring up when we talk about a team like this. Not only do Looney and Gunless have history with one another, but also Prestini and Gunless have history with each other, right? Back in Infinite Warfare, it was in the early stages of that United team when we saw the Twins start to make the rise, when we saw Gunless start to make the rise as well. These two players have played with each other before, and they were kind of the big storyline throughout a majority of Infinite Warfare, was this young United roster of guys that we've never really heard of before, starting to make some noise and really contending with Optic in a number of different very, very interesting grand finals. So you have guys that have also won a championship together. Along with that, you also have Looney and Octane, who play with each other throughout the end of Advanced Warfare and Black Ops 3, played under, I believe it was Rise Nation and Team Envy. They won a championship together. I believe it was UMG South Carolina. So again, history. It is good for this team to have history. And not only is it just history, it is winning history, which there's a difference, right? Whenever you have play with a separate player previously, it's important. But whenever you've won with a player, you instantly have some sort of respect for that guy because you know what it takes to win with somebody else. And you know that they have the ability to reach a certain level where winning can be possible. Like I said, whenever you've won with someone previously, it often leads to a lot of respect. And I feel like with the personalities that you have on this team, which we'll talk about a little bit more, you will see at times some conflict. And so it's important that you have guys who know what they are getting into, guys, like I said, who have played with one another before, know how to work with one another, and have also managed to rather win championships with different players mixed in with this team. And to go along with this announcement, I do have to say that I am incredibly happy to see a few of the guys that are returning to starting lineups for this next year of Cold War. One of the first ones is Looney, right? Started off on the Toronto Ultra. I think he's going to be a great uniting piece for this team. I feel like he was very underutilized on that Ultra roster. Kind of started off as a captain, has been kind of labeled as a great IGL throughout a majority of his career, a great leader just in general. And I think that Seattle is very much going to benefit from having someone like him in the team specifically, right? And I think to go along with it, it's also important that he has a history with Gunless and Octane, who are instantly looked upon as the two main slayers for this group. So like I said, you have a guy who already has a history in leading teams. You have a guy who has obviously won before, and he's won with two other players, of which are considered the best two slayers on the roster. So it's great to see Looney back. Had a major, I guess you could say, kind of shift away from the starting lineup, kind of rode the bench throughout the end of the season with the Toronto Ultra, and it was very surprising to ever really see him kind of rejoin that team. Obviously, the Ultra, they started to get better as the year went on, and it makes sense, but it still was kind of strange. Another player that I'm happy to see back is Gunless, right? We haven't seen Gunless in a while. It's been a kind of it's really been a rough past few seasons for Gunless. It wasn't really just Modern Warfare because if we go all the way back to World War II, finishes top 16 with Rise Nation, a roster that was looked upon as one of the heavy favorites coming into that event. They get eliminated early. He later on has issues with the Luminosity Gaming team in Black Ops 4. Toward the end of the season, joins on Envy to close out the year. They finished top 16 in what is Envy's worst placement at champs in their history. comes in here to Modern Warfare, joins alongside this very hyped up Chicago Huntsman team, plays with players that he really wants to play with, guys like Formal, guys like Arcides. This team was very, very hyped up coming into the year because it was the transition from Optic to a new brand. Energy, what is this team? He later gets benched and doesn't play at Champs. So you have this interesting kind of time period for Gunless in which everyone knows the talent that he has. And I feel like at every point, or I'll say this, at one point throughout every single title that we've seen him play in, maybe outside of Modern Warfare, it has been no question that he has been a top 5 player. And so it's interesting when you look at the fact where you say, wow, a guy's been a top 5 player in every single title that he's played in. Surely he's had some good runs, but when you look at the end of the season, when you look at the different teams that he's been to, the constant situations with benching being involved, it is kind of odd. Now with the Seattle Surge team, I think there is a very decent amount of stuff to like about this group. Like I said, you have the history, you have guys that have won together before. When you really look at this team from top to bottom, guys who are known, guys who have a history in winning. You have someone who's obviously won a world championship on this team, and Prestini back with United in 2019. A lot of history here, right? But I think that there are things to worry about with this roster as well. Not only did history kind of spark me whenever I first saw this team in terms of players who have played with one another, but I also thought about the prior history that these guys have had on different teams, right? You have players who have big personalities on this roster, right? Guys like Looney have been a part of that Splice team. I remember a quote from Looney back in the day when that team first formed. It was, hey, we're probably one of the most chaotic teams in the entire CWL. Guys like Gunless, right, has been in a benching situation on 3 different teams over the last few seasons. He has had an issue when it comes down to the later seasons. Has finished top 16 in his last 2 champs that he's played at, and he did not play at the last one because of personality problems with the Chicago Huntsmen, a team that started to kind of at times look good and then started to trail off. A majority of the time, I thought it was because of internal problems. It looked as if that was the case, and it looked as if they did get better at the end or at the stretch with Prestini. And then you also talk about this team in terms of things that I'm kind of worried about as well, is honestly the SMGs a little bit. Because I think having Prestini and Looney together are good, but I don't know if those 2 players are going to fully kind of get exactly what the other provides, if that makes sense. I don't know if necessarily they're going to benefit as much as somebody else would when you have who you have on this team, because I think that Prestini has the ability to really set up Looney. I think that Looney really has a great opportunity to set up someone like Prestini. I think it is going to be this effect of the other trying to set up kind of, I'll say this, it's kind of one and another setting each other up, and it's never really going to generate as much success as they would like. Now, again, I think that they're both very talented SMGs. I think they have the ability to work together, but it is something that I am worried about. Personally, his consistency has definitely been something that has been talked about for a while. And then also, when you talk about kind of the flex and main AR for this group, Octane and Gunless, a powerhouse duo. When you talk about those 2 players in tandem together, have never played with one another, and there's a reason for that, because last season Octane went on the record and said basically that he did not want to play with Gunless. It was rumored for a while that they did not want to be on the same team, or rather Octane didn't want to be on the same team with Gunless, and a majority of that was because of his attitude. There were rumors kind of toward the end of the year that Gunless possibly could have been joining the Surge and all of these different things. So it is interesting now that they are going to be on the same group. And the reason for why Gunless has been made a free agent, because obviously he was a benched player, is because of his attitude. And so I feel like in this moment, if you are in Gunless's shoes, this is his chance to prove that he can be a solid teammate, right? Because we've seen it on the past few rosters that he's been a part of. The reason why he has struggled in terms of his kind of ending of the season, the reason why being benched has been brought up so many times prior, the talent is undeniable. And when you have a player who's as talented as he is, yet is still struggling, there is something to be said for that, right? The comments, the things that have happened on stream, he has a certain mentality, which many would argue is not a bad mentality, but in the way that he approaches it, sometimes isn't all that great, right? It's not always easy. When we talk about esports like Call of Duty specifically, in terms of regular sports, they don't work the same all the time, right? Communication is heavily involved, and that is why communication oftentimes can be the make or break between different teams. Some of the greatest rosters in Call of Duty esports history have not gone away because of talent. They have gone away because of internal problems. That is what's happened with the dynasties. That is what happened with some of the greatest teams or some of the most hyped up teams. A majority of the time, it has come through internal struggles and internal problems. So I think that this is going to be Gunless's true opportunity to prove that he has the lasting ability to be a solid teammate. And I think it is going to be an important time for him. And I hope that not playing at champs has helped him realize this is your chance. And after the Seattle Surge, if this year doesn't work out, if another benching problem starts to come through, he's starting to run out of options, right? Starting to run out of options. And I think the Seattle Surge got a great pickup here. But at the same time, Octane has been worried about this for a reason, and I think that is something to be focused on. Like I said, the talent from Gunless is undeniable, right? One of the greatest skilled players that we have in Call of Duty today. Did not have the chance to really showcase that on the Chicago Huntsmen. I think he will have the ability to do that here with the Surge, and I think he'll be put in a good situation around players that he wants to be with, around players who are like-minded in terms of the way that their last season went, which I think could be a very good uniting factor. But if it doesn't work here, in an environment of which he has players around him that are not only good, but have a history with him, what happens next? Right? The same thing can be said for someone like Dashy on the Huntsman, right? This is your chance. You're being put on the spotlight. You were considered one of the greatest players, yet didn't play at champs last season because of internal issues. Both had different internal issues with two different teams, but the same process is still there. So I think when we talk about the Seattle Surge, again, a number of different talented pieces, but for me, I'm going to be very focused on the internal problems that could arise with this roster. Again, when you talk about teams that have a lot of big personalities, when you go through a dry spell, that's when things can start to become somewhat of an issue. But again, the talent is undeniable. When we talk about the SMGs, that really is going to be something that I think has to be kind of noted throughout a majority of this year. One of them is going to have to really have a standout season, right? It's either going to have to be Prestini or it's going to have to be Looney in some capacity. One of them is going to have to really kind of lead the way for the other, if you will. Because again, I think that they have a very good chance of setting up another SMG. I think these two guys together, it's still a little bit foggy in terms of whether or not it can work. But I think they've got a chance to really show some sparks of greatness. Like I said, the worry for me is whether or not the dry spells are going to cause some problems. But again, the winning history and the hunger around this team could be what helps them kind of unite and be a solid roster toward the end of the season. Excited to see the Seattle Surge, excited to see these guys kind of up and kind of moving forward when we talk about Cold War. But again, I do have some doubts.